Congreso vamos a tener la mesa redonda, The Future of Europe and Western Society. Como panelistas tenemos la honrosa presencia de George Philip Nicholas Windsor, conde de St. Andrews, y el doctor Eduardo Puch de la Villa Casa. Lo recibimos con un fuerte aplauso.
Gracias.
George Philip Nicholas Windsor es un miembro destacado de la familia real británica, filántropo y exdiplomático. Educado en Eton y en Downing College, Cambridge, donde estudió historia, sirvió en el servicio diplomático británico en Nueva York y Budapest. Ha trabajado en el sector de libros antiguos y actualmente dedica gran parte de su tiempo a causas benéficas. Es patrono y trustee de varias organizaciones, incluyendo la Next Century Foundation, la Global eHealth Foundation y la Welsh Symphony, además de haber sido nombrado canciller de la Universidad de Bolton en 2017. Eduardo Puch de la Villa Casa es licenciado en Política, Economía y Derecho por la Universidad Rockingham de Reino Unido y máster en Política y Gobiernos de Europa Occidental en la London School of Economics and Political Science. Gran parte de su etapa profesional la ha desarrollado en la empresa telefónica como gerente de regulación de telecomunicaciones corporativas, director de relaciones institucionales, director de relación con grupos de interés y alianzas público-privada, director de reporte corporativo y reputación y director de reputación, relaciones con grupos de interés y comunicación de sostenibilidad. Finalmente, como moderador de esta mesa, tenemos al señor Rafael Casado Lezama, director de la carrera de Relaciones Internacionales del UPC, para que modere este espacio. Un fuerte aplauso, por favor.
Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes. ¿Escuchan? No. Hola. ¿Se escucha? Ok, perfecto. Gracias. Buenas tardes. A nombre de la Universidad Peruana de Ciencia Aplicada, es muy grato para mí, gracias al decano de la facultad, el doctor Mauricio Novoa, que me invitó a moderar este siguiente bloque, con dos especialistas, expertos, en un tema de la realidad internacional, hacia dónde nos encontramos, cuál es la realidad del occidente, del western. Y sin ningún otro preámbulo, preferiría dar la palabra a los ponentes. ¿Quién quisiera iniciar? Would you like to start? We previously were talking about democracy, how we understand democracy in the West, and how we understand democracy in the, let's say, in the Chinese side. I think it will be a very nice start point of view just to understand Western, because that's what we usually we live.
Yes. It's an important question because we talk about democracy as a value in itself, and democracy with capital D. But what really are the values inherent in democracy? What do we mean by it? To me, it seems that the essential thing of democracy is accountability. That was how it really evolved. That the rulers should be held accountable to the governed. That government should be by consent, and if the governors fail in their task, then they can be corrected or replaced. It's evolved to something much more than that, and so it's now become a way of setting the agenda for a government and giving people the option to choose a different party. But it doesn't have, I'm not sure it has values that are intrinsic to it. It's a procedural value rather than an intrinsic one, I think. So it still needs to be filled with values, whether they be intellectual or visions of society, visions of the good life, of as Father Orban was saying earlier, of our understanding of what it means to be human. So I think we talking about democracy is only a beginning, and we have to work out what the essential values that we want to convey and that we want to see put into practice in our societies. I'm afraid I begin really to compare with with non-European models. I don't know enough about the Chinese model, but it's obviously a very different one. But in the United States, for instance, the United States is not I think, as we were saying earlier, it's not a pure democracy. The constitution involves various checks and balances, which are supposed to offer counterweights to the power of the president. You have the Congress, and you have the Supreme Court, and you have the Electoral College. At the moment, it seems all these checks and balances are being tested by the current government in the United States. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that develops. Maybe Eduardo, you have views on these things.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the UPC, the university, and to Mauricio for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I think there are a completely different set of values in Western society than in some Asian societies, especially in China. I think Western tradition is based and shaped by Greek philosophy, by Roman law, by Christianity, and over the centuries that has generated the institutions, the Western institutions, and also a set of values that are very different to other parts of the world. It's true that the democracy in the West has evolved. It wasn't always a democracy, but I think these three pillars that shaped what the Europe is today and what Western civilization is today makes it very different from, for example, China, that hasn't got these values and these traditions and this legacy, and has always been from when it was an empire to our days, has always been run as an autocracy. So I think it's more not only the political system, but also the value system, which is very different in the West and obviously in Europe to the value systems that exist in China and other parts of the world.
Yes, talking about the point of this conversation is about Western democracy in the Western society. What do you think about what is happening in Hungary, for example, and United States? Democracy. We're talking about the Western side, and we see positions of the Hungary government or the Italian government different from the French society, and then we have coming down for South America. What we think about what is happening in Nicaragua, what is happening in Venezuela. We're talking about Western. We're talking democracy in the Western. Not now talking about China, but we're talking about the countryside of the United States. I mean, if we think about in the past, West and East, talking about from the West, United States, the head, and then how do you think it is happening nowadays?
There's an evolving understanding of democracy, and certainly you mentioned Hungary. They talk about Viktor Orban talks about what he calls illiberal democracy, so rather than liberal. So he has a different understanding, and Actually, interestingly enough, I find increasingly it seems that young people, even in my country, Great Britain, and other European countries, are expressing doubts about the democratic model because they see, given some of the threats that the world faces today and the urgency of confronting these challenges, for instance, climate change, people wonder if the model of democracy we have inherited is capable of confronting these challenges. And some people openly talk about having a more authoritarian kind of government that can really shake things up and make the changes that they feel are needed. And this is worrying, actually. That I understand the sense of urgency and the sense of the challenges we face, but I think to lose the democratic framework that we have developed, and to say that perhaps we need a temporary dictatorship, even, which is being talked about sometimes. I think that's a dangerous way to go. So we have to be very careful, I think. And of course, you mentioned some of the developments in, say, Central America. Well, that's another matter altogether, and a very difficult and challenging one, which you know much more about than I do.
Well, I agree with George. I think also the democracy thing, young people, democracy hasn't been able to fulfill or to give to young people what their expectations were. So I think they see that the democracy has betrayed themselves. For example, the huge unemployment, the access to houses, education, and I think young people are satisfied with the democratic system, which also the thing is that most young people have always lived in democracy, so they don't know any other system. We are Spain. We are a very young democracy. We only had the democracy from the 1970s. So we people from my age, for example, were brought up in the transition from dictatorship to democracy, and so we realized how important democracy is, and how the democracy has changed our country, and how people can express freely what they think, and they can choose the governments they want. So it's a huge step for a country like Spain. I think it's true that governments and some governments haven't been good enough to fulfill the expectations of some of people in these countries. So there is an increasing movement against the democratic system, but I think it's not the fault of the system. It's the fault of the political ruling classes that haven't been able to fulfill the promises they've done during the political campaigns, and that generates a lot of frustration in the people in this country. But I think what we should do is explain what democracy is, explain what the values that the democracy have, and explain that it's other alternatives are much worse, and they're not going to fulfill their expectations. So I think there is a lot of explanation to do with young people, and to explain them what the values of democracy can bring. And so I think it's more a problem with the political elites than with the democratic system itself.
Well, one frustration that people often express about a democracy is that we are, maybe in our country, for instance, we are invited to vote for new government every 5 years, and so what happens in between? And I think maybe we need to broaden and the base of democracy, so there's more a discussion, more. There's been talk, for instance, of having citizens' assemblies, which would enable more consultation among ordinary people, and that might be a way forward. But I think we also have to. There are other essential components of a democratic society. Well, education is absolutely critical. Civic education, and then the freedom of the press. Having a healthy press in which diverse opinions are expressed, and there's real debate about the options for the future. This is very important, and of course, there are, governments often do not like this, and they try to control the press because they. But that brings about risks, because then as there's less diversity of opinion that is expressed, then that actually reduces the options for society. So I think that can be a danger.
Let's go back. Let's go back to 1945, Second World War. The world needed to be created, built. Talking about from the Western side, it was based on democracy, with the values that we knew at the time, and we have learned from that to nowadays. But then we start to see that countries see democracy in a different ways. You mentioned education problems elite, problems of class, a lot of poverty, inequality. So this is what we're facing now. So today, in the West that we are, what kind of world we're building? Of course, when we study international, we say, well, with the order is moving from one order to another one. We don't know which new order we are developing. But the reality nowadays is that the Western that they have a president, or prime minister, or whatever, which they have a lot of power, which means democracy is not strong, which means people cannot express themselves, or they are put into jails. So what can we do? That's the big point, because we know that there are problems, and what kind of a system we're living, talking about the Western side, because as I mentioned before, Italy, Hungary, Spain, France, and they should go back to South America, all the Western side. So we're not the same. So what can we do nowadays for the future?
Well, I think after the Second World War, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall, most people in the West took for granted democracy, and the democracy you have to work on it for it to exist and to flourish. No, it's like a tree. So I think most Western countries thought that the democratic system was going to stay forever, and there was no need to work on that system. And now we see that in some countries, the democratic institutions and the separation of powers, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, have been intervened by especially by the executive, and they are not independent as they should be if we want democracy to work. And I think that's one of the problems we're seeing in some countries, and especially in some countries where the system has been taken by executive power and has become authoritarian systems. That's the case of, for example, Venezuela or Nicaragua, no? That the system has been manipulated by the executive, and from a democracy, without the people realizing, the country has fallen into a totalitarian state. I think it's very important in all our countries to have a strong civil society, strong institutions, strong civil institutions that can fight and that can look after a healthy democratic system, and ring the alarms when the system or democracy is being threatened by authoritarian leaders. And I think that's a very important part of civil society. Civil society can be only go to vote every 4 or 5 years. They have to be present all the time, because if we are not present, and I mean we, all of us, then the system can end up being an authoritarian system. So it's part of the political ruling classes, but also part of the citizens of our countries to have strong, to make a strong civil society that confront these authoritarian takes that some politicians have.
I would completely agree with what you say. I think yes, the importance of civil society and civil institutions is absolutely critical, and this is something which is under threat in a number of countries, even in Europe, where there's increasing suspicion on the part of the executive sometimes of civil society bodies which are seen maybe as being under having foreign influence. It's very easy to point to outside interference and to play the patriotic card in an exaggerated way. But I think the problem is these organizations take time to build. They can't really be created overnight. It's been difficult, I think, and certainly in some of the newer democracies in Central and Eastern Europe, which seem to start off very well after the end of the Cold War, but have in some cases become increasingly polarized, and the level of public debate has become less civil, one might say, and much more hostile. And this is a real problem. But of course, it's not just in Central and Eastern Europe. We see it in all our countries now, and the new parties emerging, which claim to offer solutions, maybe too simple solutions sometimes to some of our problems, and that is a challenge as well. So,
You talk about society itself, and when you see talking about South American, not talking about Europe, you have an older society. Let's talk about these young societies, South America, Central America. What do you think, or the university can turn, or the big countries can turn, because education, as you mentioned, is the base, because you need to develop a society to encounter the government, to explain, to say, to express their needs, to express their position. But those comes by the hand of education. And education is not a tick that you do it from one day to another. You need to be developed progressively, and for that, you need, for example, money. You need inversion of resources and everything. Especially nowadays that you have a new technology, internet, whatever. You need. It has cost. So, what do you think from Europe can be done, or universities European can give as an advisor how to develop a better society in these third developed countries, for giving a name?
Well, education is it's extremely important. It's critical, actually, to educate young people, but to educate young people not only in subjects, which obviously they have to learn subjects, but also in values. I think it's very important to educate young people in values, and to know and to make them think in a critical way. I think young people have to have the knowledge, but also universities, and I'm speaking from the point of view of my university in Spain. One of the things that we will be very, very satisfied if when they leave university, is that they have a critical thought, and that they question things, and that they leave universities with very clear values, and appreciate freedom of speech, freedom of education, religious freedom, all these freedoms, and that they work afterwards in their professional life, not forgetting all of the values they've learned at university, and work to protect, as part of this civil society, all the freedoms that democracy brings.
Yes, yes, and I would say one of the core values is that one would hope that young people would develop is learning to respect diversity of opinion and diversity of views, while sharing, one would hope, certain core values of Father Orban mentioned a respect for human dignity, a respect for the sanctity of life, which without which no society can thrive. We face huge challenges, but we need to work together in a mutually respectful and tolerant and kind way, without being polarized and divided in the way that some politicians seek to bring about.
Now, coming back again to the role of society, I was listening in recently the news in Mexico about this generation of new generation Z, and there was a lot of protest, and the protest was condemned in a way by the government. And I'm thinking about, and I mean, how a government is going to condemn expression of the society. I usually said, because this is we're talking about democracy, the values make a democracy strong, and if you question the people asking for their needs, so how you see this different position when you are in the government? You question, but when you are in the opposition, you ask for that.
Well, I think government's the first thing it should do is to listen to what young people have to say. I mean, people protest because the government is not giving them what they expect from them. So if young people protest, it's because they're not satisfied with what the government is doing, and I think it's legitimate for young people to protest when they think that the government, in some cases, are saying one thing and doing another. And I think not only Mexico, in many European countries, young people tend to protest because they think that the expectations are not going to be fulfilled, and that what they see for the future is not what they expected. So I think in some countries, especially in Europe, there is a lot of frustration with of young people, and that it's very easily used to polarize public opinion and to create populist recipes that at the end are not fulfilled and create a greater frustration. So I think the best thing is to talk straight to young people and say, for example, in Spain, things are not easy. Things are not easy because things haven't been done as they should have been done. So now we are having a lot of young unemployment, a lot of problems with young people accessing their first homes, a lot of problems of young people reaching the end of the month with very small salaries, huge inflation in the last years, which have gone against young people, which are the persons that earn the less, and all those problems have accumulated. And I think it's legitimate for young people to complain and to express their frustration with the government.
No, absolutely, and I think the right to protest is absolutely core to democracy, and it goes back a long way. And it's very dangerous when governments seek to suppress this. It's an essential way for people to make their voice heard, and when they feel that their voice is not sufficiently heard, then that causes real dangers. But another thing I would say, you mentioned the importance of how important it is for governments to listen. One problem about democracies is that obviously they tend to represent the point of view of the majority, and the risk is that minorities are not heard and not sufficiently represented. We have to devise ways of making sure that the voices of minorities are heard and respected, because if not, that causes all sorts of difficulties in society, and eventually people will find ways of making themselves heard, even if the normal process of government just doesn't allow this.
Other point that I would like to raise in this statement is about corruption, because we're talking before that one of the problems is that society is becoming very unsatisfied of democracy because it is not fulfilling their needs. And one of the problems that we're facing in democracy is corruption. In all sense, in all part of the different, you say, executive, Congress, or parliament, or judicial system, you will start to find a point of corruption. And then, what do you think about the problem of corruption in democracy, thinking about nowadays in the Western? Because the problem of the Western is that the structure that is based democracy is moving. I mean, it's becoming weak, and it's not becoming stronger. And corruption is playing a role in this disestabilization of democracy itself?
Well, I think what we're seeing now in some countries, it's moral corruption. I think there's a loss of values and of some traditional values, and we see that this moral corruption has invaded the governments and the institutions, and more and more we see people that have no principles, and once they get in power, what they do is to try to make as much money as they can. But I think that's why I was saying before that it's very important to teach at university, at schools, since young people principles and values, and for them to distinguish what's good and what's bad. And once I think that you teach them that, if they choose to go into political life, they will distinguish what is right and what is good. And if you go into political life, what you should do is work for the common good. And I think that perspective, it has been lost in many political elites, that they are there to work for the public good, not for themselves.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I think you're right that corruption is a growing problem, and of course it breeds cynicism, it breeds distrust, it breeds the idea that everybody is just out for themselves, and that's very corrosive and harmful, and it's not easy to find answers to it. Obviously, a free press is very important to expose public corruption as much as possible, but it's a cultural thing, and it takes time to shift the culture, and you obviously have to, when people are exposed in positions of public trust and public authority, who have indulged in corrupt behavior, they have to be shamed and punished where appropriate. It can, obviously, it's a universal thing to some extent. All societies have some corruption. There's no society that's entirely free of it, and we'd be naive if we think it can ever be completely eliminated. But I think the expectation, as you say, Eduardo, should be that if you go into politics, it's a form of public service. You're there to serve the common good, and you're not there just to fill your pockets. I think that value has to be reinforced through education from an early stage.
There's a thought that the people has the government. They vote. You vote, and you have a government, and then this government start to be coming to the extreme right, and start to control, for example, the freedom of the press. And then you start to see around nowadays that some of the important countries in the Western are going in that direction. And going into that direction means democracy is becoming weaker. And then you see strong countries like Germany. Recently, I was listening to the news that there is a political party from the very far that is coming strong again. So the reality, as we talked at the beginning, is the society, the people are not happy with the government, and because they are not happy with the government, they started to bring into power this kind of a government with the idea of right, of authoritarianism. So if this is the reality we're facing, how do you see the next 10, 20 years in the Western about democracy?
I agree with George what he said before about the free press. Free press, it's essential for democratic systems. But I think the world today is much more complex with the new social media, which is very difficult to control and to we've heard in some elections in some European countries how foreign countries have used social media to destabilize the country, and the election to influence the election. And also, what social media does, it's you only get the view that you want to hear. At the end, the algorithms, what they do, it's that they give you the news and the information that it's in accordance with your ideology. So what it does is reinforce your ideology with, and normally it tends to be more and more polarized. So you get some people that only hear one side of information, and they don't have the whole, let's say, set of opinions to have a critical opinion about something, because they are only getting this impulse of news that they want to hear. So I think that's making that's radicalizing opinion, and that's limiting the people's way to of having other opinions and making their own choice. And I think that's very very dangerous. I think I think young people especially have to be aware of this the way social media works.
Yes, absolutely. I think people need to be. I think it's an important, essential part of education now is to make people more aware of the way that social media seeks to manipulate them and to shape their opinion, and to restrict their options really and I think that is dangerous, and there's no easy answer to it, except I suppose through education and civic education. Obviously, people are free to choose what they read. After all, somebody can choose to read a conservative newspaper or a socialist newspaper, and that's always been the case. But social media, I think, are a bit different because they do tend to push people into bubbles where which are these algorithms feed people more of the same, and also the amount of misinformation and disinformation that appears on social media is dangerous for democracy too. This is something we all have, I think, as a society, we have to be very aware of and to try to combat.
You talked about something which is nowadays is becoming very famous and very updated, which is fake news. So I mean, it's happening, and the big question is how can you control, but not controlling the way, because if you control, you are limiting the free right to receive information. The thing is, of course, those goes by the hand of education. So if you have people, you have society, or you have a country with people with the level of education is not very high because of the consideration. So how can how can we imagine to allow those people to receive the right information? Because this is the reality nowadays. I mean, fake news is not fake news. It's just constructed because it's looking for an objective, good or bad, but it's objective because somebody has designed it for a purpose. So how can we try to deal with this? It's actually a fact.
I think it's very difficult, as you say, to control fake news. Funny because now they can make up photographs of yourself. I mean, doing all kinds of things, and they look real. I mean, if so I mean, the technology has improved so much that it's very difficult. I think we are a step behind, in my opinion. I think technology is moving faster than ever. When I was a teenager, mobile phones didn't exist. So I mean, and most young people won't imagine their lives without a mobile phone. And I can assure you that we had a life at the time. But I think technology really it's moving so fast that I don't have the answer. But it's true that it's completely it's quite nuts now that the things are moving so fast. And fake news. It's very difficult to tell if it's a fake news or it's a real news. So I think something should be done, but I think in a global level, because I mean, if you try to impose limits in a country, it's very difficult to control the social media today. Maybe in China they have achieved that, but and even there, I'm sure they have loops that the government doesn't control.
Yes, I mean, I think, as you say, that the speed with which these things are developing is day by day is breathtaking. I suppose again, one comes back to the question amount of education, and people just have to be taught to ask more questions. To when you're presented with a piece of why should I believe it? Who is the source? Who might be trying to manipulate me in this case? So I think we need to become more sophisticated as consumers of news, and to learn to think about what we're reading, what we're seeing, what is being presented to us. But it's a huge challenge for society, undoubtedly.
Another challenge is IA,
Indeed.
especially last year. Ago, it was a conference organized by France in order to try to establish some kind of rules, and there was not an approach for ruling, give an order on this new element that is part of the society. And the question on the answer is what is going to be the impact of those in values, in democracy, in the values of democracy.
Yes, it's true. We don't know now what's going to happen with artificial intelligence. It's very difficult to predict what will happen, and it's true that before journalists had their own ethical sort of rules, and they actually didn't publish some things because they were unethical. But this is not the reality now. No, but I think something should be done. Some code of conduct related to artificial intelligence should be done, because otherwise there will be no rules, and everything will be acceptable, and that will basically take us to what Hobbes calls the state of nature. No, it will be absolutely chaotic. But I think that's why I think that some sort of ethical code should exist.
Yes, I think we do need something like that. Whether it's likely to happen, unfortunately, is another question. The speed with which artificial intelligence is developing, and unfortunately, the main proponents of it, I believe, certainly in Silicon Valley, the view seems to be that they should just push ahead as fast as possible and see what happens, and that is dangerous. But I think if I could just, sorry, this is you are leading our discussion, so I hope you don't mind me just raising just a slightly broadening a discussion by looking at the context within which democracy functions, and within the West and more broadly, and the kind of and to come back again to this question of the values that we seek. And I think one thing that we need as a society, which is becoming in many ways more polarized and more frustrated and often more angry, is we need an education in how to live with each other and to respect each other, care for each other, think about each other. We need to get back to, I think, some basic principles which we often forget in this fast-moving world. And what are these core values which we need as a society? Many of which were mentioned by Father Alban in his excellent talk earlier. But I think rule of law, obviously, essentially, that fairness, compassion, respect for the weak, for the vulnerable, for the marginalized, for those who are neglected generally by our societies. We have to, I think, revive these values in order to build a strong society in which democracy will flourish. So.
El espacio para preguntas. Open the space for questions.
Recuerden que pueden preguntar, pueden comentar, pueden incluso manifestar una sesión. Y con respecto al tema de si prefieren hacer la pregunta en español, también se puede explicar la traducción para que puedan participar. ¿Está bien? ¿Hay alguna pregunta o comentario? Sí.
¿Quiere?
The correlationship between democracy and capitalism and the free market that you see in the Western society and versus non-democratic other countries and very closed markets. Would you define that as something that's really interrelated? I mean, how would you define or help the democracy with capitalism? I mean, is there a relationship? It's often considered almost brothers between democracy and capitalism. Is there
Well, I think it's true that sometimes we mix democracy with capitalism, but it's but two different things. One thing is democracy, and another thing is capitalism. capitalism has evolved basically in the last in the 20th century, but democracy is prior to that, and the values that democracy have do not necessarily fit with what capitalism is. So I think there are two sides, but it's true that some people most intentionally mix capitalism with democracy, but they don't have to go together, capitalism and democracy.
Yes, I mean, I would agree. I mean, one could argue that economic freedom and freedom to choose where one works and how one works is tied to it's part of a free society, which is obviously key for democracy. But all too often, of course, the effects of capitalism can go against democratic values. So it's a difficult balance. But I think generally, freedom, be it political or economic, is closely related to democracy. But again, we've had even in Western Europe, as in recent times, we haven't necessarily seen pure capitalism. There have been various forms of maybe state capitalism or mixed economies with a welfare state, even sort of socialist governments within the West. So there's no straightforward correlation.
¿Alguna otra pregunta o comentario? Pero por allá. ¿Está bien?
Do you think socialism nowadays is used just as a weapon for the right wing to promote an agenda in their own political parties? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear. Do you think the socialism nowadays is just used as a word for weaponize the other socialist parties? Because nowadays a lot of Democrats only actually use them to promote their agendas and political beliefs.
Yes, I think undoubtedly these labels like socialism can be used as a way of demonizing those whose opinions one doesn't like. So one has to be very careful how one defines these terms. There are different understandings in Europe or in the Americas of what socialism means, or liberalism, populism. So you have to think about the definition of these terms is important, and it's too easy to use them as insults or as to close down debate. And we need to actually open debate and look in a dispassionate way about the different ways we can approach the problems of society.
¿Había otra mano levantada por acá? Sí. Puedes estarla en inglés o en español, como prefieras.
Before asking the question, I just wanted to thank you for the conversation so far. It's been a pleasure to listen to you, and I have agreed with almost everything that has been said so far. I wanted to ask an interesting question. I wanted to know, before asking the question, I just want to say that I do agree that democracy and the way it's implemented in Western society in general is the best form of government, at least that I can see now in the world. So I just want to preface my question with that. But the question was that, do you think that in certain extreme situations in a society that an authoritarian type of government can in fact be or lead to the greatest positive impact in society, at least in the short to midterm, compared to completely democratic system where there was obviously checks and balances in power. And the reason I asked that question is with a clear example of President Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, and how his country has gone from being in the midst of incredibly real turmoil, the highest murder rate in the world, being a much more prosperous society in a very short amount of time. Yet he has done it through essentially authoritarian means.
Well, I understand what you say, and I think Bukele is a good example. But I think that some things are crucial for a country, for any country. It's to obey the rule of law. I mean, we say the country has benefited from this authoritarian, but who has really benefited from that? Have human rights been eroded by these authoritarian politics? If there's a change of government and we have eroded the rule of law, what would happen with a new government? So I think it's very important to keep the political institutions and to obey to the rule of law, because once you erode the rule of law and the independence of the institutions, you don't know what that new power is going to do and how it's going to affect society in the long run.
¿Alguna otra pregunta o comentario?
What do you think is the solution to our national problems, to our protests and all things that are happening today?
I'm not sure there's an easy answer to that question. I think it's important for the voices of the young to be heard, and hopefully we will have governments that are sufficiently responsive and capable to respond to the challenges of our time. But unfortunately, there are no guarantees as to where we will end up. So I think you have to keep fighting, keep working for to improve your societies. That's the only thing one can say, really. Sorry, that's maybe not a very helpful answer, but I think there are no simple answers, sadly.
I just want to add something else to the question. It's about
the institutions. If we don't fight to make institutions, you don't have anything. Sometimes we think about the executive power, the judicial power. Those institutions need to be strong. When you have strong institutions, everything that takes place inside the country could be organized, or it doesn't go to the extreme. Loss of the people right, loss of the people thought, loss of the people speaking. So we need to make institution of the country stronger every day. Every day.
I think we mustn't lose this. Temptations of authoritarianism and populism. I think we mustn't lose hope. We mustn't lose faith in the possibility of working things out together as a society. And we must be wary of seeking shortcuts to change, maybe through violence or other means. Because I think we all have experience of what can happen if one takes that path, and the huge damage it can do for to so many people's lives. So I think we have to resist that, taking what may be very tempting shortcuts to achieve the goals we seek.
I completely agree. Also, there is I think we all have a duty as citizens to choose the right governments when we vote, and because afterwards we complain, and sometimes that government has been elected by us. So I think we have to think twice what we want for our country and what we think will be best for all.
Tenemos espacio para una última pregunta o comentario. ¿Alguno? Genial. Con esta pregunta cerramos.
Do you think extremist opinions are the ones influencing young people who don't import themselves well?
No se escuchó. No se escuchó.
Do you think extremist opinions are the ones influencing young people who don't import well themselves? And adding to that, do you think extremist opinions are the ones influencing young people who don't inform themselves well? And do you think that the poorly informed are the ones who make up the majority of the protest?
Well, I think young people, like all of us, should make an effort to inform themselves right, and to have a political consciousness, and realize that what happens in politics also affects them, like it affects all of us. And I think young people have to have the means in nowadays to inform themselves, and to especially to have their own opinion and their own criteria, and to act according to their own criteria. I think it's very important to have a critical way of thinking, and not to give for granted all the information that we receive.
Cerramos esta conferencia con un fuerte aplauso, por favor.